There's not enough known about these yet that you can say definitively that they're fixed personality structures that can never change. But if that possibility is open, it's extremely difficult. So that points to what we need to do is recognize these conditions and keep them out of positions of power. So I guess there's two parts to that. And the first part of it is because of what I'm going to say in the second part.
Okay.
The first part of it, I usually tell people, if you think you're a psychopath or have narcissistic personality disorder, you don't.
Okay.
Because if you're concerned enough, if you have enough conscience to think, I may actually be damaging other people, or I'm guilty about the way that I'm feeling, they don't have that. So if you're worried about the way that you're treating people, and there's a difference again, emphasize this, there's a difference between narcissistic personality disorder, which is a fixed and extreme, and ways in which we interact with other people that are narcissistic and greedy, which comes back partly to the question about why we don't recognize it. Because not only are these parts of behaviour, they're extreme, but they're also how we can also, all of us can act. It's also normalised. Again, going back to the structure of society, going back to, it's actually validated. If you think about in terms of neoliberal capitalist society, it's actually validated. Greed is good. The way to get ahead is to elbow other people out, and you just have to look at job interviews and look at, sell yourself. Yeah. So that it's normalised and it's validated in large parts of society, which is also part of the reason that we don't recognise it. Yeah. To go back to the second part of your question, though, these conditions are, going back to the definition of personality disorder, as far as psychoanalysis can tell, there is no changing, because these are deeply structural things that were embedded within our personality at a very early age. How you would ameliorate that, again, there's some disagreement on this. Some psychoanalysts Heinz Kuhut, for example, who would have specialised in narcissistic personality, he argues that people can change, but that happens over years of intense psychoanalysis. But to my mind, for the most part, and again, and I wrote this at the book because that was one of the things people were saying, there's not enough known about these yet that you can say definitively that they're fixed personality structures that can never change. But if that possibility is open, it's extremely difficult. So that points to what we need to do is recognise these conditions and keep them out of positions of power. It goes again to, oh Lord, when people talked about Trump, he'll be different when he gets into power, or he'll be different next time around. You don't know what you're talking about. You really don't know the structure of the personality that you're dealing with if you expect that this person is going to change whenever they get into power. They may tell you that. They're only telling you that because they want back into power.
It's funny because I'm thinking now, is there any positions, that aren't necessarily attributed to positions of power where someone with one of the three personality disorders would thrive in a useful or in a constructive way?
There's a discussion on that around psychopaths, because psychopaths are also very cold. They're unemotional. So things like surgery and airline pilots in an emergency and so on, they talk about these things. I think Ron Johnson talks about that, about the professions in which psychopaths can thrive in a positive sense. Psychopaths can also thrive in financial industry and high-powered industries where there's lots to be gained from manipulating people.
We've all seen those examples of Patrick Bateman and the American Psychos, and Wall Street is pretty heavily associated with psychopaths.
But when I hear that question, it's like, no, don't even think that way. These are very dangerous personality disorders. They're extremely dangerous for other people, but they're also, for the individuals involved, it's ended up, one of my colleagues, Richard Wood, he's written a book about malignant narcissism as another. It's just another variation. Well, it's a variation on these, an amalgam of these different personality disorders.
Okay. So just to kind of define that, is that an amalgamation of maybe two or three personality disorders?
It has traits of psychopathy,
yeah,
not narcissistic personality disorder, and paranoid personality. So
and that's common, right, for people to have more than one,
yes,
generally.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. So there is this discussion within the psychiatric profession, within mental health profession, about the delineation of these as individual disorders, or the overlap between them, and so on. So that's still an area of discussion, still an area of research, and so on. But when it's also, as I was saying, they're hugely destructive for other people. But when you think for the individual themselves, they're living a life in which they have no nourishment from other people. They have the nourishment that we get from human interaction is through fun, talking. It's about the love and care, and
well, it's an exchange rather than being served,
and it's a reciprocal exchange.
Yeah.
They can't get any of that, and fundamentally, they can't get love. Richard and I were talking about how would you define this, and you define their condition actually as being an envy of love, because they themselves can't get it. They want to destroy the conditions that other people can love within. You can see that, absolutely. You can see that in Mao, in Cambodia. They destroyed the families. People were numbers. They weren't allowed to talk about their partners or their children as intimates, as intimately related. If one of their horrific stuff, but this goes, we haven't really gone into it. You'll see it in the book. The depth of the pathology that they bring you to. This isn't just surface level and narcissistic and boastful. Going back to this idea in Cambodia and Pol Pot in power, the regime that they implemented was that, as I said, there was no love, there was no family. And they were executing people for minor infractions of, they were starving, and a child would dig up a root and eat it, and that was unequal, and they would kill the child. And the parents would be punished if they showed any emotion that their child had just been killed. This is the depth of pathology that they bring us to.